Hello and welcome back. Today we're talking about mythology and one of the craziest myths of all time, the story of Oedipus Rex. The play Oedipus Rex is one of the most important tragedies by the Greek playwright Sophocles, and it's an excellent example of tragedy and how tragedy ought to work. It's also an excellent example of key archetypes of what a hero is and how a hero deals with his problems. We frequently return to the story of Oedipus when we're trying to explore how hero stories have worked all throughout history. Not only that, but Sigmund Freud used the story as the basis for his theory about the Oedipal complex and how young boys develop. So here's the story. Oedipus Rex is the king of Thebes, and he earned that kingship not by birth, not by birth, but by saving the city from a giant monster sphinx that asked them riddles. Every time anyone would try to go in or out of the city, the monster sphinx would ask them a riddle. If they couldn't answer it, they'd get killed. And so finally, Oedipus answers the riddle, the sphinx dies instead, and in walks Oedipus. Yay, the city is saved! They make him king because their old king had vanished a while back and was heard to be killed on the road by a band of ruffians. So here is Oedipus sitting on his throne, but the city is plagued by a terrible disease, and people are dying left and right. And Oedipus wants to help his people, but he doesn't know quite what to do, so they send to the oracle, and they find out that the plague can only be stopped once the murderer of the old king is found. Oedipus, eager to help his people and full of good-hearted intentions, seeks to find that murderer. But things get much more complicated, because we have tons of backstory in this play that's slowly unveiled. The characters all begin to piece together the story of the past. Oedipus is eager to solve the problem for his town, and so he sends for prophets and oracles, and he encounters the prophet Tiresias. Now Tiresias knows the truth, and he knows that Oedipus is not going to like the truth, and so Tiresias refuses to tell him the truth. Oedipus takes offense at this and thinks that Tiresias must be a traitor if he's not going to tell him what happened to the old king. And so he accuses him of committing treachery with his brother-in-law Creon. Finally, in his anger, the blind old prophet Tiresias says, "You're the one! You did it!" And of course Oedipus says, "No, I didn't. You're just saying that because you're a jerk." Oedipus is quick to anger, and that causes him some problems later on. However, in his quest to solve this problem for his people, he becomes distracted, and his vision shifts from saving his people to his own identity. You see, his identity has always been a bit of a puzzle for him. He was the child of a king, but one day, when he was hanging out with some friends, somebody said, "Hey man, you're adopted!" And Oedipus was like, "No, I'm not!" And he ran to his parents, and they were all like, And so he ran to the oracle and he said, "Am I adopted?" And the oracle, instead of saying, "Yeah kid, you're adopted," said, "One day you will grow up to kill your father and marry your mother." And he goes, "I've got to get as far away from my parents as possible so I never do that horrible thing." And so he runs away from his parents, forgetting that he's adopted. On his way into the big, broad, wide world, he comes across this jerk king with a big entourage who try to throw him off the road. And in a fit of road rage, he kills the king and everybody else. Only one guy gets away and runs back to Thebes and says, "Hey, we were attacked by this huge band of ruffians. Really, not just one guy who killed us all." Oedipus, that was a mistake. Later, Oedipus comes to town and, he saves the town, and they say, "Will you be our king? You can marry the queen." Guess who the queen happens to be? Guess who that king was? Oops. So Oedipus marries his mother after killing his father, and then they have 4 children together. They're like sibling children. Kind of complicated. But again, nobody really knows this. So Oedipus has had this weight of prophecy on his back this whole time, and in the midst of all of his search to find out what's really happening with his town and what happened with the old king, he discovers that his parents are dead. Those adoptive parents that he thinks are still his biological parents. And he says, "Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, it's kind of sad, but it's also wonderful because that means I will never fulfill that prophecy of killing my father and marrying my mother." And his wife, Mama Jocasta, says, "Oh yeah, I never believe in prophecies. Prophecies are stupid. Because you know what happened when I was younger? I had a baby, and it was prophesied that this baby would kill his dad and marry me. And so we totally just took that little sucker and we nailed him to a tree through his ankles." And Oedipus goes, "Hey, where'd this funny mark in my ankle come from?" And it just so happened that Jocasta and the previous king had handed baby Oedipus over to some shepherds after impaling his ankles in order to nail him to a tree and let him die. But the shepherds, being rather soft-hearted, decided to hand him off to other shepherds, who then in turn handed him off to Oedipus's adoptive parents. So Oedipus survives, and in fact he has funky feet because he had a nail through them when he was a baby. That's gotta be unhealthy for your development of your feet bones. His name Oedipus means club foot. So when Jocasta meets this guy, who happens to be the age her son would be, and he's got a weird limp thing, and he's got a weird prophecy thing that exactly matches the prophecy of her own child, she somehow misses that. In any case, the details slowly begin to line up, and as Oedipus has already made too many mistakes to keep going, he realizes that he's almost to the heart of the mystery. But unfortunately, he doesn't see what the heart of the mystery really is. Everyone around him begins to see, but Oedipus is too blind to all of this. He's too focused on what he wants to see to realize what he's about to see. Finally, he discovers that no, he was adopted, and he says, well, that's exciting, I can find out who I truly am. And so he finds the shepherd and questions the shepherd, who happens to be the same guy that ran away from the fight when Oedipus killed his dad. And finally, Oedipus is down to one saving point. The story was that a band of ruffians had killed the old king of Thebes. And that couldn't have been him, because he wasn't a band of ruffians, he was just all alone when he killed that weird guy at the crossroads. So the servant who ran away finally, under pressure, confesses, yes, I'm sorry, there was only one guy, and it was you, and you're the kid, and you're the king, and you married your mom. So the truth is finally out. Oedipus, who could never clearly see himself, has driven the point until there was no turning back. And so in the midst of all of this tragedy, Jocasta, his mama wife, realizes what's happened, and she goes and she kills herself. And Oedipus, in his horror, has finally seen the truth. He's finally seen who he is. And in the perfect paradox, he gouges out his eyes and says, now I can see, but I don't want to look on this world anymore. I don't want to look on my family anymore, seeing who they truly are. So, in the moment when he's finally able to see, he loses his physical sight. Sight is one of the most important aspects of this whole story. In fact, if you go through and you mark every time some word associated with vision or sight or the ability to see or light or dark or conceal or reveal is in the book, you will fill up pages. I had my students do this once, and I had a student who filled an entire page, front and back and every inch of the margins, with all the instances that these type of words show up. Because this story is all about seeing and not seeing. And so Oedipus' end is pretty inevitable. Every character who is blind is the character who can truly see. Tiresias in the beginning, Oedipus in the end. And the characters who think they see and think they know themselves are the characters with the least clear vision. So Oedipus removes his crown and hands it over, losing the throne of Thebes and becoming a wandering exile. Will he find redemption? Find out in the next play, Oedipus at Colonus. Oedipus is the perfect tragic hero because he's a great man who makes serious mistakes, but then pays for them in awful ways. I mean, nobody deserves to find out that information about yourself. And none of it was intentional. His flaws are more in the way he goes about looking for the information, the way his anger causes him to not listen to Tiresias in the beginning, the way his bullheadedness keeps him going after the story even when everyone else realizes that he really should let it go. But does he deserve blindness? And does he deserve to discover that his whole family is a horrible, twisted mess? It's pretty harsh. But he does gain self-knowledge in the end. It's a pretty cheap reward considering, but it's something. Maybe it would have been better if, at the very beginning, he had continued to ask that question, who am I? Instead of rushing off and jumping to conclusions the first time he heard the oracle. Also, the story is interesting for the self-fulfilling prophecy aspect. Jocasta hears this awful prophecy, and she does something about it, which inevitably leads to it happening. Oedipus hears the prophecy about himself, and instead of continuing his course of questioning his identity, he rushes off to try to stop the curse from happening, and winds up causing it to happen. Everything could have been avoided from the beginning if Oedipus had just stayed home as a baby. Thanks for watching. Click down here to subscribe. or you can click over here and watch another video about me discussing literature. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Leads to it happening. Lights. Silly automatic lights.